the Angel Makers of Nagyrév. Little is known of Zsuzsanna Fazekas before 1911, when she suddenly appeared in the Hungarian village of Nagyrév, 60 miles southeast of Budapest, on the river Tisza. She was pushing middle age, a widow by her own account, but no one seemed to know exactly what had happened to her husband. Between 1911 and 1921, midwife Fazekas was jailed 10 times for performing illegal abortions, but sympathetic judges acquitted her in each case. Meanwhile, apparently unnoticed by police, she had inaugurated one of Europe's most bizarre and deadly murder sprees. The rash of homicides is traceable to World War I, when able-bodied men were drafted to fight for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. At the same time, rural Nagyrév was deemed an ideal site for camps containing Allied prisoners of war, a circumstance that catered to the wildest fantasies of women suddenly deprived of men. The prisoners most likely enjoyed a limited freedom within the village, and it soon became a point of pride for lonely wives in Nagyrév to boast of a foreign lover, sometimes 3 or 4. An atmosphere of rampant promiscuity prevailed, and husbands straggling home from combat found their women strangely liberated, frequently dissatisfied with one man in the marriage bed. As wives began to voice complaints of boredom and abuse, midwife Fazekas offered them relief: supplies of arsenic obtained by boiling flypaper and skimming off the lethal residue. Peter Hegedus was the first known victim in 1914, and other husbands followed over time before the poisoning became a fad, the casualty list expanding to include parents, children, aunts, uncles, and neighbors. By the mid-1920s, Nagyrév had earned its nickname as the Murder District. During that period, an estimated 50 women used arsenic to trim their family trees. Zsuzsanna Fazekas was the closest thing the village had to a physician, and her cousin was the clerk who filed all the death certificates, thereby subverting homicide investigations in the embryonic stage. The final toll of victims is still unknown, but most reports suggest 300 as a reasonable estimate for 15 years of wholesale murder. The Angel Makers saw their world unravel in July of 1929 when a choir master from neighboring Tisza accused Mrs. Ladislaus Sazbo of serving him poisoned wine. A stomach pump saved his life, and detectives were still pondering the charge when a second victim complained of being poisoned by his nurse, the same Miss Sazbo. In custody seeking leniency for herself, Sazbo fingered a friend, Mrs. Bukanovsky, as a fellow practitioner. Bukanovsky, in turn, was the first to name Zsuzsanna Fazekas. In 1924, she said Fazekas had provided the arsenic used to kill Bukanovsky's 77-year-old mother, after which the old woman was dumped in the Tisza to simulate an accidental drowning. Fazekas was hauled in for questioning and staunchly denied everything. Without solid evidence, police were forced to release her. But they mounted a roving surveillance trailing Fazekas around Nagyrév as she cautioned her various clients, arresting each woman in turn. 38 were jailed on suspicion of murder, and the police descended on a Fazekas home to seize the ringleader. They found her dead from a dose of her own medicine, surrounded by pots of flypaper soaking in water. 26 of the Nagyrév suspects were held for trial at Zolnok, where 8 were sentenced to death, 7 to life imprisonment, and the rest to lesser prison terms. The condemned included Zsuzsanna Ola, a self-styled witch who boasted of training venomous snakes to attack her victims in bed, competing with Fazekas in sales of Aunt Susie's inheritance powders. Ola's sister Lydia, a septuagenarian whose flat denials of guilt failed to impress the jury. Maria Cardos, who murdered her husband, a lover, and her sickly 23-year-old son, persuading the young man to sing her a song on his deathbed. Rosalie Sebastian and Rose Hoiba, condemned for the murder of boring husbands. Lydia Ciceri, convicted of killing her parents. Maria Varga, who confessed to buying poison from Fazekas to kill her husband, a blind war hero, when he complained about her bringing lovers home. Julianne Lipka, whose 7 victims included her stepmother, an aunt, a brother, a sister-in-law, and a husband she poisoned on Christmas Eve. And Maria Sendi, a true liberationist, who told the court she killed her husband because he always had his way. It's terrible the way men have all the power.